Hi, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to another YouTube video. In today's video, I'm going to be comparing my strength at 9 months pregnant versus 9 months postpartum. I'm actually 10 months postpartum, so I'm a little bit late on this. But I did a similar video to this at 8 months postpartum versus 8 months pregnant. But anyways, let's just go ahead and hop right into the video. So before I hop into my overall takeaways of the difference of training at 9 months pregnant versus now 9 months postpartum building back up, I'm just going to show my starting pre-pregnancy strength versus my 9-month pregnancy strength versus my 9 months postpartum strength. So starting with squats, you saw in that first clip, that was my all out 1 rep max at 259 versus 9 months pregnant. I was able to hit 225 fairly easily. And then now at 9 months postpartum, 237. So 22 pounds lighter than I did before getting pregnant at 9 months postpartum. So definitely building back up slower than the amount of strength that I actually lost during pregnancy. So I think the postpartum was the hardest hit just because I had to take those 5 weeks off of actually powerlifting right after giving birth. So I think that's what hit me strength-wise the hardest. Bench, I started pre-pregnancy 165, and then you saw me doing 145 pounds at 9 months pregnant, and then this is 154 pounds at 9 months postpartum. And all these competition videos are actually like literally right before I got pregnant. Like this one, I got pregnant the very next week after failing 374 pounds, and then you'll see me hitting 363 pounds easily in the next clip. My max is actually 369, and then you'll see me repping 285 pounds off of an elevation. I kept deadlifts the lightest in comparison to my all-out strength during pregnancy just because it's the most taxing on the nervous system, and you're also relying on a small brace, which I tried to avoid bracing during pregnancy. So I'll talk about that more once I get into my overall takeaways of training during pregnancy. And then at 9 months postpartum, I was at 347 pounds. So again, a 22-pound hit in strength from pre-pregnancy versus 9 months postpartum, actually 3 days shy of 9 months postpartum to be exact. And then on bench, I only lost 11 pounds. But overall, everything felt really good, and I'm building back up nice and slow and easy and gradual, and most importantly, everything's feeling nice and functional and better than it was before pregnancy, which is great. So in my 8 months pregnant versus 8 months postpartum video, I talked about this a little bit, but basically before 8 months pregnant, 7 months pregnant and earlier, you could pretty much lift as normal, with the exception of I did have to widen my squat stance a little bit just because I'm a really narrow squatter. That was the only movement modification that I had to make. But once your belly gets bigger, you're gonna have to make accommodations due to the growing belly size. So the wider squat stance is an example if you don't already squat with a wide squat stance. And then at 8 months pregnant, I started deadlifting elevated off the ground just because I deadlift in a conventional stance. So you wanna make sure that you're able to reach the bar, obviously, and reach the bar comfortably, because I could reach the bar even at 40 weeks pregnant. I could still reach the bar, but it's not gonna be comfortable. So you're not gonna wanna do anything that's going to strain yourself. So I just gradually started to increase the elevation. I started with 2 mats of elevation, and I went up to 5 mats of elevation between the process of 28 weeks and 40 weeks pregnant. But overall, that was the biggest change that I had to make. Everything else that I did was just more of a mindset and breathing change that I made at the very, very start of pregnancy. Obviously, I didn't want to lift with a belt during my pregnancy because you don't want to increase intra-abdominal pressure, but you can still lift, you can still push yourself. You're not disabled, you're not crippled. You are strong, you are capable, you are carrying a human being. And I can say that all the way up through after my due date, I felt physically very strong and healthy. I felt like there's no way that I have labor impending anytime soon because I'm feeling this good, and that's because I stayed strong, and I stayed strong with the progression of my weight gain, because obviously you're going to be gaining weight during pregnancy. I gained 26.5 pounds during my pregnancy. My starting body weight was 145 pounds, and then by the end I was about 171 pounds. And then aside from the squat and deadlift changes, you are still going to want to be aware of other movements that might cause difficulty with balance. For example, I trained single leg exercises all the way throughout my pregnancy, but earlier on in my pregnancy, I was able to do step ups, and I still could do that at 40 weeks pregnant, but is it going to be the best choice when I have you know, a 7+ pound weight in front of me? Probably not. So you might opt for something that has some support, like a split squat on a bench, or even a split squat with both feet on the ground, as opposed to something like a step up where you are physically off the ground, you have no weight bearing on the other leg. You might want to choose something that's going to still be single leg, challenging yourself, like maybe not doing a single leg RDL without support, but maybe doing it with a foot on a wall or a foot on a bench, something that's going to give you a little bit more stability. But you should still train your stability, because when you are pregnant, your body produces more relaxin, which causes you to be more likely to get little aches and pains, twists and turns. Your joints are a lot more mobile, they're a lot more susceptible to getting injured. So it's important that you're training your stability during pregnancy. But there's really not that many actual movements. There's really, I would say, no movements that you would do before pregnancy that you can't do during pregnancy, but you're going to want to be aware of those accommodations due to the obvious growing belly size, and also just due to a safety element. So you're going to gauge yourself where you're at before pregnancy. Is your balance okay? You can continue doing those exercises, but I would recommend regressing some of those movements. Bench, upper body, those are going to be easier to just keep doing the same thing because it's not as much as a stability and load bearing component. However, I will say that for bench, you are going to want to be aware of your feet potentially on the ground. It might get uncomfortable, so you might want to opt for something like a floor bench, or you might want to put your feet up on the bench if that gets uncomfortable, but it felt good for me throughout the whole way. And then you're going to want to make sure you're mindful of, I mean, some people I see them arching big arches all the way through the pregnancy. They have no issues, but I just felt more comfortable with breathing into my chest as opposed to during my stomach with my bench press, and I changed my arch position. So some movement modifications that I made, yes, but my strength was still able to progress and I was still able to challenge myself throughout my entire pregnancy. As I start to talk about the biggest shift that I made during pregnancy, which was my breathing and bracing, I'm going to show some of my current training videos. So these aren't going to be my actual pregnancy videos. I've showed a lot of my 9-month pregnancy videos already. These are going to be my 9 to 10 months postpartum current training videos as I'm talking about the training principles, so you can kind of compare what it's like not being pregnant versus being pregnant. And then the biggest shift that I made at the very start of my pregnancy that I continued all the way through 9 months pregnant is the mindset shift and the breathing shift. So you're not going to be training with the intention of, in a 4-week training block, I'm going towards PRs by the end of the 4 weeks. You're still able to progress your weight. You're still able to have times where you phase down the weight and then build back up, phase down, build back up. In my last week's video, I talked about that in more detail, and I also gave a link to an example program. If you're curious on that, go ahead and check it out. You are still going to have those phases where you push it, where you back off, but you are not going towards PR territory. By the end of the training block, probably at like maybe RP 7 max on a lower body lift, and push my upper body a little bit more to maybe RP 8, but most of the weights are like RP 5 and below. I'm really not trying to push myself. I'm trying to focus on the mechanics and the breathing. So I made a lot of videos about this during my pregnancy, but during pregnancy or before pregnancy, when you're powerlifting, you're using a belt, you're creating intra-abdominal pressure when you're breathing. So you are taking a big breath in, bracing against your belt, and you are holding your breath the entire time. When you're pregnant, that's obviously not going to be the best thing to create that intra-abdominal pressure. Even if you're not using a belt, if you're doing an exercise like a plank where you're just holding your core in an isometric position, that's going to be something you're going to want to avoid. You're going to want to opt for movements that are going to be more dynamic and functional. It's like a cable wood chop, or if you're going to do a side plank, for example, you don't want to do that isometrically. You want to do it with movement, so that you're not just holding that tension in your stomach. You're going to want to be moving through it. And then when you're breathing during the movement, you're not bracing the entire time. Although there have been some studies that say that is debunked a little bit, but I still didn't feel necessarily the most comfortable with creating a ton of intra-abdominal pressure. I wanted to move through it because the goal was training to strengthen my pelvic floor and making sure that I'm preparing for birth. So when I'm squatting, I am inhaling, relaxing my pelvic floor, and then exhaling, bringing my pelvic floor back up. So you are inhaling, moving that air out like you're bracing against a belt, and then exhale, bring it back in. So your stomach is not in that brace the entire time. And then on the deadlift, I did do a small brace just because it was just the up portion of the movement. That's the only part where I'm exerting myself. So that's where I did do a little bit of a brace, but then on the way down, I relaxed. But overall, My strength still stayed pretty well throughout the entire pregnancy. I was happy with how everything felt, but obviously that's not going to be the priority. The priority is being healthy for a healthy baby and healthy to endure the marathon that is birth. I had a really positive birth experience. If you're curious about how it went, I did make an entire super long video. It's the longest video I've ever posted. I believe it's like 40 minutes, but I found watching birth videos very helpful and very positive during my pregnancy because it got me into a good mindset. And ultimately my mindset, not my physical prep, my mindset was what got me through birth unmedicated. No epidural, nothing. And I did have a water birth, which was also really cool. But anyways, that is all for this video on comparing my strength from 9 months pregnant to now at 9 months postpartum. I'm currently in a phase of trying to get back to where I was before pregnancy. So I'm not too far off, but I'm hoping to compete sometime by the end of the year at the latest. But anyways, let me know what you want to see in future videos. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one for another video. Bye.